Picture this. Hollywood's most beloved actress, the innocent girl who sang "Somewhere Over the Rainbow," was actually being systematically destroyed by the very studio that made her famous. What happened to Judy Garland behind the scenes makes every other Hollywood scandal look like a playground dispute. The truth about how MGM turned a talented 10-year-old into their most profitable and most tragic victim will change how you see The Wizard of Oz forever. Most people think Judy Garland's problems started when she became famous. They're wrong. The nightmare began when she was just a kid, long before she ever slipped on those ruby slippers. Judy's own mother, a frustrated performer who never made it big, was the first person to feed her daughter those little pills. By the time Judy was 10 years old, she was already taking uppers to stay awake for grueling 72-hour shoots and downers to knock her unconscious when she wasn't needed. Her mother called them vitamins, but these weren't your typical children's supplements. We're talking about heavy-duty amphetamines and barbiturates that would make a grown man's heart race. The woman who should have protected her was essentially turning her into a pharmaceutical guinea pig, all for the chance at stardom. When MGM discovered this golden-voiced kid, studio head Louis B. Mayer didn't see a talented child who needed protection. He saw a money-making machine that came pre-programmed for abuse. Mayer summoned Judy to a contract without even bothering with a screen test, and that signature sealed her fate. The studio immediately took over where her mother left off, but they perfected the system. MGM put Judy under 24-hour surveillance with a stern chaperone who followed her everywhere, including the bathroom. They weren't protecting her. They were making sure their investment stayed profitable. The studio treated this teenage girl like livestock, monitoring every bite of food, every conversation, every moment of her existence. The pills became Judy's daily reality, but the physical abuse was only part of MGM's control system. Studio executives, led by Mayer himself, turned sexual harassment into an art form. Starting when Judy was just 16 and filming The Wizard of Oz, powerful men at MGM made it clear that her body was part of their compensation package. Mayer had a sick routine where he would compliment Judy's voice by saying she sang "from the heart," then place his hand directly on her left breast to show where her heart supposedly was. This happened repeatedly, meeting after meeting, with Judy too young and powerless to stop it. When she finally found the courage to tell him to stop, Mayer actually started crying, asking, "How can you say that to me? To me, who loves you?" The manipulation was textbook predator behavior, making her feel guilty for refusing his advances. But Mayer wasn't the worst of them. Another MGM executive, whose name Judy never revealed, summoned her to his office with a simple demand: have relations with him or face the consequences. When 16-year-old Judy refused, he didn't take rejection gracefully. He screamed at her, "I'll ruin you, and I can do it. I'll break you if it's the last thing I do." This was the reality for Hollywood's most famous teenager, a daily gauntlet of powerful men who saw her as their personal property. Between the ages of 16 and 20, Judy was approached for relations over and over again by studio executives who believed that having their way with female employees was just a perk. The systematic destruction of Judy's body was almost as calculated as the harassment. MGM was obsessed with keeping their star thin, even though Judy was already an underweight teenager who desperately craved normal food. Mayer personally nicknamed her "my little hunchback" and "fat little pig in pigtails," constantly reminding her that she was supposedly too heavy for the camera. The studio restricted her to a starvation diet of chicken soup, black coffee, and cigarettes, supplemented with appetite-suppressing pills. When Judy tried to order a normal lunch at the studio cafeteria, they would replace her food with a bowl of soup and a plate of lettuce. On her own 16th birthday, she wasn't allowed to go near her cake because the studio decided she needed to celebrate 2 months early to fit their shooting schedule. The drug regimen that MGM perfected was essentially legalized torture. They would give Judy and other young actors amphetamines to keep them working 18-hour days and then force barbiturates down their throats so they could sleep for a few hours before starting again. Judy later described the cycle. They'd give us pep pills, then they'd take us to the studio hospital and knock us cold with sleeping pills. After 4 hours, they'd wake us up and give us pep pills again. That's the way we worked. And that's the way we got thin. That's the way we got mixed up. And that's the way we lost contact. By the time she finished filming The Wizard of Oz at 17, Judy was completely addicted to both uppers and downers. The studio had created their perfect performing monkey, totally dependent on chemicals and completely under their control.
Here's something that'll blow your mind. The song that made Judy Garland immortal almost didn't exist, MGM executives wanted to cut Over the Rainbow from The Wizard of Oz because they thought it was too slow and depressing. They believed kids wouldn't sit still for such a sad song early in the movie. Louis B. Mayer himself argued that the song would hurt the film's pacing and bring down the audience's mood. The only reason we have this iconic piece of American culture is because one producer and his assistant literally threatened to quit if the studio removed it. Think about that. The song that the Recording Industry Association of America later voted as the greatest song of all time was almost deleted because executives thought it was a boring waste of screen time. The tragic irony is that Over the Rainbow became Judy's prison song. While audiences saw Dorothy's innocent yearning for escape, Judy was living that desperation every single day. She was forced to perform this hopeful ballad thousands of times throughout her life, but each performance reminded her of the childhood innocence that MGM had stolen from her. The song represented everything she had lost: the ability to dream of better days when her reality was an endless cycle of pills, abuse, and exploitation. When fans requested it at concerts, Judy would sometimes break down crying, not from joy, but from the painful memory of what that song cost her. By her late 20s, the damage was irreversible. Judy's ex-husband Sid Luft later revealed that she attempted to end her life at least 20 different times, starting when she was 28 years old. The studio had created such a chemically dependent, psychologically shattered person that she couldn't function without the very substances that were destroying her. MGM fired her in 1950 when her erratic behavior became impossible to hide. But by then, she was so addicted that recovery seemed impossible. The studio had spent 15 years turning a talented child into a walking pharmaceutical experiment, then discarded her when the experiment went wrong. The financial exploitation was almost as devastating as the physical abuse. Despite earning millions for MGM over 15 years, Judy died owing $4 million in today's money. Her managers and agents systematically stole her earnings while keeping her drugged and compliant. By her final years, this woman, who had been one of Hollywood's biggest stars, was reduced to singing in dingy bars for $100 at night, desperate for grocery money. Her daughter Liza Minnelli later described her mother as homeless and broke, bouncing between hotels and leaving unpaid bills wherever she went. The most heartbreaking part isn't how Judy died, but how she lived. She spent her entire adult life trying to recapture the innocence that MGM has stolen from her as a child. Every marriage, every comeback attempt, every desperate performance was really just Dorothy trying to find her way back to Kansas. Back to a time before the pills, before the abuse, before the system destroyed her ability to trust anyone. When Judy accidentally took too many barbiturates in June 1969, it wasn't just the end of a life. It was the final chapter of a story that began when Hollywood decided a 10-year-old girl was worth more as a product than as a human being. The next time you hear Somewhere Over the Rainbow, remember that it wasn't just a song about hope and dreams. It was the theme music from one of entertainment history's most calculated acts of child destruction. MGM didn't just create a star. They created a cautionary tale about what happens when an entire industry decides that talent is more valuable than humanity. Judy Garland's tragedy wasn't an accident or a series of bad decisions. It was the inevitable result of a system that treated children like disposable commodities and called it entertainment. In an era when we're finally having conversations about protecting child actors and addressing abuse in Hollywood, Judy Garland's story reminds us that these problems aren't new. They're foundational. The same industry that gave us beloved classics also perfected the art of destroying the people who made those classics possible. Every time someone argues that things were different back then, or that we shouldn't judge the past by today's standards, remember that there were people in 1939 who knew exactly what they were doing to that 16-year-old girl in ruby slippers. They just didn't care enough to stop it.